This is Enigma. You can find me occasionally on IRC Tripsit. You are now listening to Diphenhydramine Memoir 2, in which I recall my second experience with DPH, in which I combined it with DXM, an over-the-counter cough suppressant, also a dissociative. And this is how the experience began. Now, my first experience with diphenhydramine, documented in my first memoir, left me suffering with hallucination persistent perception disorder, abbreviated HPPD, for a number of weeks, in which I persisted to hallucinate spiders and perceive the form of people likened to ghosts. This visual phenomena was most prevalent during the evening time, and had the effect of making me fearful of falling asleep, for the atmosphere during these episodes was one of menace, in which I would feel as if I was being watched. As such, I had sworn in my heart that I would never again use DPH, either for its recreational effects or for its prescribed purposes. Yet a curious thing happened, and a few short months after my first experience, time was able to reconcile my trauma, and I found myself thinking about DPH again. For as much as I dread the thought of it, I came to realise that the power of the experience had produced many questions with regards to the authenticity of its paranormal element, and as such I struggled to translate its meaning into my life. I came to realise in due time that I could perceive a necessity to use DPH recreationally again, for I desired to learn the source of my fear. And so this is how my second experience with DPH came about, in the March of 2014, while I was temporarily contracted as a solar panel engineer. The evenings were at long last becoming warm again after a cold winter, and I was feeling in good spirits, having recently discovered dextromethorphan in the wake of my first DPH experience, which had left me searching for a more suitable over-the-counter medicine I could get high from. I look forward to realising its true potential as a psychoactive over the course of the coming summer, and was keen to graduate to second plateau after a couple more first plateau experiences. I had of course read with interest on the internet that DXM and DPH used in combination produce an interesting synergy, in which those brave enough and foolhardy enough to mix the two together commonly reported reaching a mystical state and having an out-of-body experience. It was with this line of thinking that I walked up to the village pharmacy after finishing work one evening that March and purchased a 100ml bottle of Robitussin dry cough medicine containing 150mg of DXM and a pack of Nitol sleep aid tablets containing 50mg DPH per tablet, a grand total of 1 gram. I then visited the local newsagent for a crate of 8 beers and headed down to my village rec with a mind to neck a few cans and take a few 100mg DPH. When I got there I did precisely this and ate around 150mg of DPH. I then settled down on the grass in order to watch the sunset over the cornfields and proceeded to drink a couple of beers. After I'd been doing this a short while, the sunset became as if it were washed out with tones of orange and yellow, so rich in hue they appeared to bleed through the canvas of the sky. At the same time, my vision was also deteriorating in the fading light of the day, and had become somewhat choppy as mild waves of anticholinergic induced nystagmus set in. I stood up feeling noticeably spaced out and gazed upon the fields. In the distance I could perceive the vague forms of people running through the corn, which I likened to shadows. I tried to focus my eyes in on them, but as I did so they would disappear, only to reappear again in the corners of my vision when I looked away. This was a very eerie spectacle indeed, and as such I walked home a little faster than I usually would, for fear I might see something lurking in the shadows that I didn't want to see. When I got home, I decided to go and see a friend who I regularly smoke weed with. I left the DXM at home, which was uncharacteristically sensible of me during this phase of my drug addiction, but did eat around another 150 milligrams DPH before leaving my house. On the short walk down the main road to my friend's house, I noticed that I was in a noticeably more intoxicated state than I would usually expect to achieve from drinking 2 cans of beer, and was also suffering from a little of that classic DPH-induced amnesia, wherein you forget to consciously respond to your thoughts, so instead your thoughts begin to respond one to the other, which can create some extremely bizarre and nonsensical dialogues you only catch the tail end of when you become conscious that you're thinking again. My friend had a shed in his garden, which we regularly chilled in. I arrived there and bought a gram of weed from him to smoke whilst he played FIFA on his Xbox. Over the course of the next couple of hours I polished through my remaining beers, and I felt the effects of the DPH become more pronounced and synergised nicely with the alcohol. My eyes were constantly drawn to various corners of his shed, where in the shadows I could perceive movements like those of insects. As I smoked my way through a few joints, my vision further deteriorated, the cannabis seeming to enhance the fragmenting effect the DPH was having on my overall field of view. As I grew more stoned, I felt increasingly jovial and appreciative of the interesting synergy between the 3 compounds, and there was an air of magic and mischief about the shed. I was feeling pleasantly intoxicated as I left my friend's shed for my house. I was happy that I had a couple of joints left on me, and was excited to eat more DPH when I got home. I had barely been walking a few minutes when I remembered something of vital importance: the bottle of DXM I had left in my drawer. Then a terrible yet fascinating idea occurred to me. No, I said out loud, attempting to stall the inevitability of me caving into this most mischievous of suggestions, but to no avail, as I was now grinning wildly at the prospect of mixing these potent farms and possibly achieving a cosmic state of consciousness. No, I said again, and then began to laugh at the absurdity of the idea. Furthermore, at the absurdity of the idea that I could resist such a temptation. With this line of thinking, I hurried home with a skip in my step, eager to continue indulging my senses. Back in my bedroom, I left my bedroom light off, as I remembered from my last experience with DPH that hallucinations were more prominent in dimly lit environments. And so I turned on my PC and used the monitor for a source of light. Leaning back in a fishing chair I kept in my room, I chugged the Robitussin dry cough medicine down in one gulp, something I could not possibly do these days as I would vomit immediately. And I also ate another 300 milligrams of DPH. Then I played some music on my computer and patiently waited for the drugs to kick in whilst admiring my present state of intoxication. I don't recall much about what occurred during that gap between me taking the DXM and waiting for it to kick in, but during that time I had apparently drunk another beer and become delirious, as the next thing I remember is looking at the time on my PC and observing with a degree of childlike awe that a whole hour had passed since I dosed. I then turned back towards my bed, where the friend that I'd visited earlier was now sitting. We proceeded to engage in a humorous dialogue which barely resembled a conversation, throughout which I was vaguely aware that I was hallucinating the whole exchange, but prone to forgetting this fact. When I did remember that I was hallucinating, it brought me great joy to think I was so delirious as to be talking to someone who wasn't really there. And yet I realised now that on some primitive level I did understand that there was indeed someone there, someone who was both conscious and aware of me, and had I any idea what this was I was engaging with, I would never have pursued DPH for as long as I did. However, since I didn't know anything about familiar spirits or demons at the time of this trip, I resigned myself to the belief that this was all part of a trip, however convincing it may be, and thought it was extremely cool that my mind was capable of producing such realistic and interactive hallucinations. I even remember saying, "Who needs friends when you've got this?" And my downfall thus began. After a little while had passed, I went to lay down on my bed and observe my room. The DXM at this point was reaching a plateau, and I writhed around in the ecstasy of my intoxication as waves of moderate dissociation and serotonergic euphoria washed over me. This had the additional benefit of neutralizing some of the less desirable effects of the DPH, and also stimulating my mind to the extent I was able to remain conscious throughout the remainder of the trip and enjoy it. It also seemed to first enhance the more enjoyable qualities of the DPH experience, and then synergize to create a new high altogether, which seemed to take the best from both worlds and combine them to produce a strange mystic state in which my hallucinations inherited a neon jelly-like quality. Resulting hallucinations were noticeably more vivid and alien in their theme than those which DPH can produce in and of itself, and as such I felt sure that I had happened upon a life-changing discovery and was excited to learn more from these synthetic gurus. At some point it occurred to me to close my eyes, and this is when I really began to venture down the proverbial rabbit hole. Behind my closed eyelids I could see a swirling red vortex which opened up to reveal a bird's eye view of road texture. Shocked by the realism of the vision, I had to open my eyes at once and was amazed to discover that the closed eye imagery was of a quality which somehow seemed to exceed that of real life. In a state of awe I closed my eyes again, and now I could see my feet standing on the surface of a cobbled road. Then, as if peering through the lens of a camera, my view suddenly transitioned so that I was now looking down the road instead of at it. As this happened, my field of vision appeared to expand outwards, and then I was immersed in a completely 3D environment which was bathed in a luminous red hue and appeared to resemble medieval England. Again I had to open my eyes, as I could not believe what I was seeing, and was once again stunned by the noticeable downgrade in visual acuity, as if I was swapping from a digital high definition feed to an analog signal. I closed my eyes again and was met with the same imagery as before. In the distance, still bathed in crimson red hue, I could perceive a medieval looking town, wherein I could see crooked houses which seemed to resemble those of the Tudor period. The vision, apparently discerning my desire to explore, changed, so I was staring down at my feet again. My feet then, apparently as a result of mental willpower alone, began to proceed down the cobbled road. Shortly afterwards I could see people on either side of me dressed in medieval garb, but was only able to pick out their torsos and legs, as I could not for the life of me work out how to control my astral body and lift my head up during this vision. I eventually engaged in some sort of telepathic communication with a passerby, but cannot remember the details of this exchange now. Not long after this, the medieval town appeared to melt away into nothing, yet this nothing was apparently something in and of itself, a vast void of space likened to a hypnagogic twilight zone of sorts. Within it I observed bizarre concepts expressed abstractly through the curious arrangement of everyday objects and matter. The place was also inhabited by ghostly entities resembling humans, who appeared to drift around the place in lonely circuits. Occasionally one of them might stop to engage me through telepathic communication, though I can no longer remember the details of these dialogues, except that they served to increase my curiosity and bafflement. After this, I cannot remember much more from the trip, and I'm not sure that I even managed to make it outside again to smoke a joint once that evening. Overall, it was a much more positive experience than my first experience with DPH had been, and being somewhat familiar with the drug after this, I do not remember feeling as fearful when falling asleep over the next couple of days, in spite of developing hallucination persistent perception disorder again. In hindsight, I can of course see now that the devils were having a field day with me during this experience, and through the lust of my eyes they succeeded in making me exceedingly curious about the things I had seen, effectively guaranteeing that I would feel a strong compulsion to continue using diphenhydramine, which of course I did, and was subsequently played into my enemy's hand of my own accord, ready to receive his false doctrine, which I will expand upon in the next memoir, in which I will reminisce on the time I combined diphenhydramine, dextromethorphan, methoxyphenidine, which is a novel and long-lasting dissociative of the piperazine class, and cannabis.